Now, 2025 is by far one of the most crucial years for the Walt Disney Company, and even Disney CEO Bob Iger. After coming out of the Snow White disaster at the box office, we all saw what happened there earlier this year, right around March to late April, right around that time frame. We all saw exactly how Disney reacted to that, how exactly they reacted to the entire box office decline, not just with Snow White, but when you're bundling all of the movies together from 2023 until now, they've been dealing with a lot of failures more than success points. And Bob Iger is really in pure panic mode, especially after the DOJ decided to actually investigate not just the Walt Disney Company, but also Bob Iger, and how there's a lot more details emerging out of that entire situation. Let's discuss. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new, and like this video to see future updates. You can also follow me at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. Now look, I've said this many times and I'll say it again, but Bob Iger should just be referred to as Bob Iger because all he does is lie, not just to the public, but also to the shareholders and the core customer base, all in order to string them along into the following year in hopes that they will actually fall for his so-called legacy that he's trying to build up before he steps down next year. And we'll talk more about that whole stepping down process in just a couple of minutes. But what's interesting here has a lot more to do with the whole investigation situation surrounding Bob Iger, the Disney Company, the board of directors, the entire corporate ladder, and how a lot of this has to do with DEI, and how Disney's really in a lot of trouble when it comes to their overall stance on DEI. Now, this all comes in the midst of how Kevin Feige also came out just recently tripling down on DEI efforts, which was just utterly ridiculous. However, with the Walt Disney Company already going through serious issues after multiple box office failures and ratings disasters over the years, one significant development now involves more to do with Disney CEO Bob Iger and how new details have emerged about how he is under investigation by the DOJ. Now, a crucial update to this entire situation now involves how Disney is already getting blamed by multiple ex-employees that they were either fired and or refused to be hired due to how they were not fit for Disney's DEI standards. Now, this ranged from those affiliated with Disney films, television programs, and even regular employees, both in the corporate ladder and for marketing teams, etc., etc. In addition to that, as to why the DOJ is now not just investigating the Walt Disney Company in general and the board, but also specifically Disney CEO Bob Iger, who is now working with those like Kevin Feige of Marvel Studios to double down on their usage of DEI, and how one strategy that is now in play by Bob Iger involves producing non-agenda driven films in order to make them successful enough to fund other DEI related projects, something that the DOJ is now looking into when it comes to Bob Iger's strategy. Now, this comes months after the administration called for DEI to be abolished. However, it goes beyond that. The overfunding over projects are also not adding up for projects that were not just created for movies, as it turns out, but also now for Disney Plus related projects, and how the DOJ is looking into exactly where all of those actual funds went and exactly where everything actually went to. The main thing that Bob Iger is now being investigated for not only has to do with demanding the Disney corporate ladder to refuse to hire those that don't fit the DEI narrative, but also how Bob Iger's strategy got leaked by multiple employees, and how this was handed up toward the government, with the overall DOJ now looking into Bob Iger's shady strategy on funding DEI and or agenda-driven projects from non-agenda-driven films that happen to be either film or TV-related projects. Now guys, let me just say one thing about that. This just goes to show you how sneaky Disney really is, especially in 2025, and how everything is orchestrated not just by Bob Iger, but it's all influenced by the top three shareholders, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. We'll talk more about that in just a second or two. Again, Bob Iger is going to do whatever he has to do to keep his image in play as the CEO, and that's exactly why he keeps on saying there's no agenda here. We don't engage in any kind of a culture war. There's no such thing as that. People fall for all this woke and DEI nonsense, and he keeps putting that out there, right? In order to actually throw off the shareholders, to throw off the core customer base, to not allow them to actually fall into the truth and exactly what's going on. So people are catching on, people are beginning to wake up about what Disney's all about. In addition to that, however, in addition to all of this, Disney was informed about this investigation that the DOJ is going to kickstart very soon, and it's creating widespread division between the board and Bob Iger, blaming Bob Iger for making things way too obvious with DEI-related projects on the horizon, and especially after allowing Kevin Feige to come out with the gloves off to announce that they are tripling down on DEI for Marvel Studios. This comes just months before Bob Iger and how he plans to step down as CEO at Disney for 2026. However, recent developments indicate that Bob Iger is trying to convince the board to allow him to stay an extra 3 years or so to build up his legacy even further, and the board is already refusing all of that. Now look, that just goes to show you the divide between the board and Bob Iger, because they don't trust Bob Iger because he makes things way too obvious when it comes to their plan and their use with DEI, right? Basically, the board, their overall disagreement with Bob Iger is that they want to make things, less obvious, but Bob Iger wants to do quite the opposite. He wants to make things more obvious with diversity, equity, and inclusion, etc., etc. And it's not just with Bob Iger's belief, but it also has a lot to do with fulfilling the demands, the requests by BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, right? If they lose them, forget it. Disney's really hurt. However, to make matters worse for Iger is that now, since the DOJ is investigating both Iger and the board and their affiliation with BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street and their forms of messaging with DEI, the entire corporate ladder at Disney is now at a standstill. And again, this obviously is something that everybody actually saw coming. It just took quite a while to catch up to Bob Iger, to catch up to the Disney corporate ladder. And when you look at everything in the rearview mirror, when you look back at 2023, especially 2024, we all saw what happened with the Acolyte series, right? I think that was the peak moment of how Disney really did take advantage of focusing on DEI instead of source material, instead of creating a very entertaining story or anything like that. And it just goes to show you exactly how things have been really going downhill for all of their brands, whether it's Marvel, Star Wars, just Disney live-action remakes based on animated classics, the Pirates of the Caribbean reboots. Yes, they do still plan to actually create those down the line, and they're not backing down on that, so that's another, thing that should be looked into. But again, Bob Iger is going to continue to double down on all this nonsense, and it's only making things worse for himself. You would think that, if anything, you would want to actually take a step back, especially after the DOJ getting involved in all of this. But again, we already know that Disney as a whole, they are actually just trying to keep it up with DEI, and I think that the reason why they're beginning to double down on this again after taking a short little break, not just to do with the strategy that we talked about non-agenda films and agenda-driven projects and how the funding's going to be used for DEI, but it has a lot to do with, you have a lot of division going right now with politics, right? And Disney seemingly feels a little bit more confident that, now maybe the time is right, that we can get back to our DEI and tripling down on all of that, essentially. But overall, I would like to hear what you all have to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I'll catch you guys later.